Hey, good morning, everyone. I'm Coach Vicki, and I'm here today to share with you the 5 stages of recognizing, leaving, and recovering from a toxic relationship. In my experience, everyone goes through these 5 stages in some form. And sometimes we get stuck in one of the stages and are unsure how to move forward from that stage. So we'll talk a little bit about that as we go today. So before I dive into that, I just wanted to share a little bit of information about me so that you can get to know me a little bit better. I was raised in a very strict religious group that controlled almost every aspect of our lives. The culture of that group certainly was that divorce was not acceptable, that if somebody was being mistreated appropriately, they probably did something to deserve it. They manipulated scripture to do and say whatever they wanted to. So if they felt like somebody did something they didn't like, they would manipulate scripture to punish that person for what they didn't like. And they had a lot of control and influence on our lives as members of that group. When I was 15, my family left that group. And the cost of leaving was, I have a sister who I have not spoken to in close to 30 years. And she has 3 kids that I have never seen. The group that we left promotes shunning and disconnecting with people who, don't see things the same way that they do. So my sister chose to disconnect from us. Also, at that point in time, lost many extended relatives as well, aunts, uncles, cousins, all the friends that we had. So in hindsight, for me looking back, I see how that organization perpetuated all the characteristics of being emotionally abusive organization, verbally abusive, and sometimes with some of the members physically abusive. So that was the stage that was set for me for the rest of my life. And all those things I learned about, that you don't leave a relationship. If something goes wrong, it's probably your fault, I carried forward with me. Another thing I'd learned there was that, you grew up, you went to school, you got married, and you had kids. And so I followed through on that, and at age 19 I got married. It just seemed like the next thing to do to me. So the guy that I married came from a family that had a lot of alcoholism in it, and I saw that. I had never really been exposed to that in my life, but I saw that while I was dating him. His father was a severe alcoholic, and then, as I came to know their family history, there was several generations of that. And he swore that he was never going to follow down that path. Well, kind of fast forward, we had 3 kids. Our life was a little chaotic. We moved like 12 times in 11 years. Our kids were each born in a different state. And in fact, today is my oldest birthday, so he's probably not watching this, but because he's not part of our group. But give a shout out. My oldest turns 22 today, and so anyway, my marriage was always chaotic. Never lived up to whatever expectation I had for it, and from the very beginning, my husband demonstrated characteristics of lying to me, criticizing me. His family always criticized me, and I never felt supported by them. And so there was always this underlying drama going on there. And I never understood what that was. Probably about 13 years into our marriage, my husband started to drink. And because I came from the religious culture that was strictly no alcohol, I'd never been exposed to any alcoholism other than what his family demonstrated. And he would say things like, well, I'm not like my dad. I don't, I hold a job down. And he would list all these things. And it's like, well, yeah, you're not like your dad. And so I never even saw what was happening under my own eyes, is that he was now starting to go down this path of alcoholism. And so that created a lot of tension for us in the next couple years. And I kind of fought out in some different ways in trying to understand what was going on for me. And about year 15, I really started soul searching for myself and trying to understand what was going on. And it took another probably year, and I was working with a counselor, and she said, well, have you ever considered your husband has a problem with alcohol? And she suggested I go to Al-Anon, which is a support group for family members who have a family member with an addiction. And it hit me like a ton of bricks, because I hadn't considered that. Here it was happening right under my eyes, and I was in total denial that it was. At that point in time, I really dedicated myself to learning more, and I did start going to Al-Anon. And what I discovered was I had felt alone in all this, this way I felt so crazy, like was I losing my sanity? And I just felt crazy, and he would blame me for everything, and I was great at accepting that blame and saying, yeah, you must be right, I did do that. So through the Al-Anon process, I learned that there's all these other characteristics that go along with addiction, and they are, criticizing. There are often other problems that go along with that. So in my case, it was money. My ex was not able to control money, and so financially we were always in a bind. And let's see, what are the other things that, this crazy making. Any of you who've kind of looked at the characteristics that go along with a narcissistic personality or a codependent personality, I was the super codependent person with my husband being the addict personality. And so what I learned is that growing up, I learned just to please people, to keep the peace. And he, growing up, only saw demonstrated, his family members who were all addicts. All he learned was the behaviors of how to treat people from that. So even though he hadn't drank for, the majority of our marriage, he still was treating me with these characteristics of what I now would call a dry drunk. And it doesn't have to be alcohol. It can be, any form of addiction, whether it's a hobby or gambling or, you name it. You know what things are out there. So I finally had this click moment of oh my gosh, I finally understand what's been happening to me all of these years. And it took a while for that to really settle in and for me to really grasp the full weight of that. And once I had grasped the weight of that, then I knew I had to make some decisions. I had been so miserable that I was not willing to continue with that misery that I had been in for any longer than necessary. Certainly wasn't willing to live the next 20 years of my life with the same level of misery that I had been. So I committed to finding a path forward. I didn't know what that looked like. I had been brainwashed literally that divorce was not an option. And even though I had separated from that religious group years and years before, that tape was still playing in the back of my head, and I had to figure out how to reset it and erase it. So I really had to feel like I'd done everything that I could in my marriage before I moved forward. So I did some counseling for myself. Several times in the past years, my husband and I had gone to counseling. It never, like, he would always say he wanted to go, but then he would never follow through and actually create any change. And so I finally came to the realization that if he wasn't willing to change, and I knew I had behaviors of my own I needed to change, but I wasn't willing to continue on this path that we were going, that the only option meant that we had to separate and go through divorce. And what really brought a light bulb of awareness on for me was my 3 kids. They were age 7, 11, and 14 at that time. And my boys were demonstrating some of the, emotionally abusive characteristics towards me that my husband was demonstrating. And it all of a sudden hit me one day, why wouldn't they be? That's all they've seen role modeled to them, and they've seen me accept it. And then the scarier thought, my daughter is seeing me accept this. And if I don't role model something different for them, they're going to grow up thinking that it's acceptable for them to act like this in their own lives. And my boys might go on to treat their spouse or partner the way I was being treated, and my daughter might go on to, be treated, think it's okay to be treated that way. And statistically, if you have one family member with an addiction, 1 out of 2 of your kids statistically will follow through with that addictive pattern. And that scared me to death, because no way in hell do I want my kids to go down that path. So I was determined I was going to do everything I could as a parent to prevent that from happening. And then later in life, if they choose that path for themselves, that's something that they'll have to deal with, and I'll be there to support them through it. But I was going to prepare them to give them all resources and information to not go down that path. So I went through the divorce process. I mean, it's so scary to know, how are you going to survive financially, and are you going to damage your kids doing this? Although I'd already decided that it was better for my kids to see that this wasn't okay. And at the same time, I'm realizing how much healing and damage that's happened to me, that I need to recover and regain my self-confidence. And I want you to know that the one super key to me being able to follow through was me investing in regaining my self-confidence. I'm a super believer in affirmations. Affirmations can change your life. And in that year of my divorce, I had a thick deck, like it was like half an inch thick, of note cards with affirmations on that I carried around with me, like my lifeline. And every time I had a moment, I was reading them. And what happens when you do that is it literally rewires your brain, changing old habits to new habits. And if you need more information on that, I've created a guide on the 3 steps to help rebuild your self-confidence to break free of a toxic relationship. I'll post the link below when I'm done with the video. So I followed through then with the divorce. There was some, challenging times in that separation, and my husband ended up moving out, and 4 weeks later moved a girlfriend into his new space, and who had a child, and now all of a sudden my kids had to deal with that. And there's just a lot of things, of changes for everyone happening during that time. And what I learned was, focusing on one step forward. What I didn't have during that time was someone to coach me through every step of that. If I had had that, someone who had been down that path before, I firmly believe I could have shortened each of the time frames that I'm going to talk about much, much shorter. And that is why today my passion has led me to being a coach specifically for women like myself. And through that coaching process, I help you work through these things in order to shorten the time period, help you have that clear path forward. So let's talk about today. I mean, I've 8 years, in May of this year, it'll be 8 years since my divorce was finalized. And my kids are happy, normal kids. And the example that I've been able to set for them, I see taking root in their lives every single day in the decisions that they make. And yeah, we have all the fun drama at times of teenagers in the family, and you know, it's been a challenge being a single parent at times where you know, you're the only one there at sporting events. And what happens when it's parents' night and dad doesn't show up, and all the hurt feelings and emotions, not only for the child, but you know, for you as a parent, and learning how to deal with those things. But that's all part of the recovery process and the strengthening process. And today, so financially, I want to just highlight that point. Once I was free of my marriage and regained that self-confidence, I had the courage to ask for a pay increase at my job that was not paying me a fair market value for a woman in a management role. So interestingly enough, in the couple years following my divorce, my income significantly increased because I had that confidence. And then we were actually able to move to a new location. So we left behind the house that for me had all this drama associated with it. And then 2 years ago, I decided to pursue my life coaching certifications so that today I could be here as a coach helping women like you through this process. So it's been a great ride. I just spent 9 days in Mexico and you know, kind of doing some self-care and rejuvenating, and that was fantastic. And because my coaching is location independent, I can deal with my clients from Mexico just as well as I can from the US. So the 5 stages that you go through in identifying, leaving, and recovering from a toxic relationship. And one of those is the stage where you just freaking can't figure out what's happening to you. And I spent a lot of years in that stage. I knew I was miserable. I knew the way that I was being treated didn't feel right, but there was nobody in my life that stood up and said, that's not right. He shouldn't treat you that way. And better yet, he was very good at only treating me that way behind closed doors. So no one really saw the extent of what he did. He could paint a very good face to other people, and everybody would always say, oh, you're the perfect couple. And inside, my heart would die a little bit every time I heard someone say that. But I couldn't understand why. And then I would beat myself up for thinking, oh, I do have it okay, and I shouldn't feel this way. And instead, I should have been trusting my intuition that something was wrong. So that's that not knowing phase. It can feel very off balance. It can feel very crazy. It can feel a lot of blame and guilt and judgment on yourself. And it's not a fun space to be. From that space, you move into the awareness space. And that happened for me, you know, when I attended that counselor and she suggested I go to Al-Anon, and all of a sudden, click, all of a sudden I began to be aware. So in awareness, we all of a sudden realize what exactly has been happening to it. We're able to give it some definition. We're able to say, hey, I was treated in an emotionally abusive manner. One of the things that helped me was I read a book that had a quiz in it. There was 25 things, and it said, if you've experienced any of these things, you've been in an emotionally abusive relationship. And I'm thinking, well, I don't think I've been in an emotionally abusive, verbally abusive relationship. But yet I checkmarked 24 of those things, and I was lying to myself about the 25th thing at that point in time. If you're interested in that checklist, reach out to me, and I have it. I can provide it to you. But it was so eye-opening to me to go, oh my gosh, that is me. I am this woman. And then I went, when you're in the awareness stage, that's often when you can do some research and start putting names to things as to, what has been going on for you. It often feels very overwhelming, like, oh my gosh, all this has been happening, I didn't know it. And I want to just say the denial phase before, or the not knowing, which is kind of denial, it is a stage where that denial is protecting you when you're not ready to have the awareness. But when you move to the emotional point of being able to have that awareness, then it comes to you, and you're given the energy to deal with it at that point in time. So starting to regain your self-confidence in this awareness stage is critical. You might work with a counselor during that stage. You might also employ a coach during that stage. And as I said, it's my firm belief that by working with a coach, even more so than a counselor helps you dig back into the past to why things are the way they are. A coach helps you say, okay, this is where we're at, this is where we want to be, and this is how we can move forward to get there. So I believe working with a coach helps you move through those stages much more rapidly. So awareness moves into acceptance. And acceptance is, okay, I'm now completely in acceptance of this is where I'm at. I understand what's going on. I'm not fighting it anymore. I'm not resisting it. I'm not making excuses for it. I'm not making excuses for the other person's behavior anymore. I'm just sitting in acceptance that this is what this person's behavior is. This is what my behavior is. It's not working anymore. I'm seeing that. And I'm just kind of sitting with it. Because we really have to be in acceptance that something is happening before we can move to that next stage of making the decision of what to do about it. Now, this is a stage where I really see people get stuck and fearful. And it was interesting, ladies, hop back in the group. I did a poll this last week, and if you haven't registered your vote in it, hop in and register. But it looks like the average lady who is trying to leave a relationship has tried 3 times to leave that relationship. So we get stuck in the between the acceptance and the decision to leave, and having the tools to follow through and leave. For me, there were, one definite time, kind of 2-ish times that I had decided to leave. We had agreed once to file for divorce and then didn't follow through. And really, I didn't follow through because of what will my family think about me? But they didn't take the time then to really dig down and see what was going on with me either. So it really was fear of what ifs that kept me from moving forward. Until I had rebuilt that self-confidence strong enough to make that decision to leave. So if you're feeling stuck right at this space of the decision to leave, that's where you really significantly would benefit from working with a coach who can help you through that step-by-step process to make that decision firm and then know how to get through that. Because making the decision to leave means a whole new set of things. Now it means if you're in a marriage that it's filing for divorce. It's, custody with the kids, living arrangements, financial arrangements. There's a whole new set of things that take place in that space. And some people stay stuck there because it's too overwhelming to figure out the fears and the what ifs. So I'm here to tell you that those fears and what ifs are like monsters in your closet at night. They seem very fearful. They seem very real. But when you turn the light on them and you start one by one looking and taking actual action steps to move forward through them, they are not so scary anymore. All of a sudden they kind of dissipate and fall away. That doesn't mean it's an easy path. My transition financially to, living on my own income, and I got just a small amount of child support. That was a really interesting transition. But you know what? I learned some really key things through that. I learned that I have to save, I have to prepare for the sporting event that's coming up. And I learned then, with the confidence later on, to ask for the extra raise that I deserved. So that is the process then of making that decision to leave. And a coach can really help you look at what's the support system you have and need to develop to leave. What's the process and timing of talking to your lawyer, and how do we deal with the kids in this situation? What are living arrangements going to be like? All those things they can help you shine a light on so they don't look so fearful. And that process, that actual divorce step process can take anywhere from, I think, like the shortest time in my state anyway was 4 or 5 months to go through that divorce process. And that's if there's nothing contested, to, in some people's cases it can take years, unfortunately, to get through that. But the final phase after that is recovery. And recovery is going to take as long as you need it to, and it can be influenced, the time you spend in that phase is influenced, one, by how much time you invest in yourself, in taking care of yourself, and learning what behaviors that you had in the past that don't serve you anymore, or the actions that you need to take going forwards. For me, it was things like learning some parenting skills that I hadn't had before, learning how to separate myself from the emotions that some of my kids sometimes triggered in me when they demonstrated behaviors similar to my ex, and really not, hanging that sentence on them of being like their dad. In that recovery process, there was a lot of forgiveness of myself and forgiveness of my ex-husband. And one of the things I really, really realized is we were both doing the best we could with the tools we were given as we were raised and at the point in time. If we had both been more self-aware and been able to see what was happening, we probably could have worked together to make a different end result. But we weren't, and that's okay. That's how it was supposed to work out. But I don't blame him for the things that I perceived that he did to me. He probably thinks I did a lot of things to him, and there are probably times that I did do some things to him. So accepting that and forgiving ourselves. 2 things I really had to forgive myself for was not seeing the situation sooner, and then really feeling like I had almost like abandoned my kids in this. The drama that was going on in our home up to filing for divorce was so consuming that it took all of my energy, and I felt like at times, I didn't give my kids the attention that I wish I would have now. So those are things that I had to forgive myself for in that recovery process. So recovery is a lot about feeling all your feelings, forgiveness, and then the final step that I love in the recovery process is learning to dream forward. When you're in a toxic relationship, dreaming isn't really an option. And so I want to encourage you that as you go through this recovery stage, allow yourself to start dreaming again. What are your passions? What are the things that you love to do? What would you like your life to look like 5 years from now? Because I believe in life by design and life by your design, not anybody else's design. And that's, for me, just to kind of help you understand how I'm been able to create that. Once I decided to be a life coach, and specifically reaching out to help women through this 5-step process, then I have gone through a space of redesigning what I want my life to look like. And part of that is, walking away from the corporate job that I still have at the moment, but is supporting me while I build my coaching business. And my dream is to have my coaching business location independent so that I can live on the beach and be wherever I want to be. I have a passion to see the world. So someday if you coach with me, we might be coaching from like Bangkok, Thailand, or some place, or probably really somewhere closer to the ocean, maybe Bali. So that's my dream for myself, and my recent 9-day trip to Mexico was just really a small taste of that dream coming true for me. And life, I just want to really express that life on the other side of divorce is beautiful, and you make it what you want to be. The best advice somebody gave me during that process is, someday this will all just be something you did and went through. And I can tell you, 8 years later, it seems like a lifetime ago for me, and it does really feel like, that was something I did one day. And now there's all these things moving forward. So the 5 stages, let's just quick review. Is this the denial or not knowing stage, when you really just can't understand? You feel yucky, but you don't understand quite why. Then there's the awareness stage, where you are now beginning to understand why. Then there's the acceptance space, where you say, okay, I accept this is happening to me. And then we shift into the decision-making phase of, I accept this is happening. Now what am I going to do about it? And then we shift into the discovery phase. So if you've identified with any part of this and feel like you've been struggling to move forward through any of these stages, or feel stuck at a stage, please send me a private message. Reach out to me, and I will be more than happy to share how my coaching package works to help you move through those stages in the best time frame that's possible for you. So that's what I want to share today, ladies. Hope it's been helpful. And I'll say hi to the couple of you that are watching live, and thank you for being here, and have a great, fantastic rest of the day.